There is a version of you that acts without your permission. It speaks when you promised yourself you wouldn't. It sabotages things you claim to want. It reacts with a ferocity that surprises even you, and then leaves you asking, where did that come from? Carl Jung called this the shadow, and he believed it was the single most important piece of psychology a human being could understand about themselves. Not because it's dark, but because it's powerful. And because whether you acknowledge it or not, it is already running parts of your life. Here are 5 signs that it's running more than you think. Before the signs, a brief explanation of what we're talking about. The shadow is not your dark side in the dramatic, cinematic sense. It is simply the part of yourself that you have learned through childhood, through social conditioning, through shame and fear, is unacceptable. Whatever you decided was too much, too weak, too angry, too needy, too ambitious, too sensitive, that is what got pushed into the shadow. Jung described it as the person you would rather not be. Not a monster, just the parts of yourself you couldn't afford to show. The shadow doesn't disappear when you suppress it. It goes underground, and from underground, it shapes your behavior, your reactions, your choices, often more powerfully than your conscious intentions do. Here's how to know when it's in the driver's seat. Sign 1. You react far more strongly than the situation deserves. Someone makes a minor criticism. A colleague gets a compliment you weren't given. A plan changes at the last minute, and something in you responds with an intensity that is completely out of proportion to what actually happened. Jung had a phrase for this: where there is an emotional reaction disproportionate to the cause, there is shadow material. What's happening is this: the external event has accidentally touched something that lives in the shadow. A belief you hold about your worth, a wound that never fully closed, a fear you buried but never resolved. The rational mind sees a minor inconvenience. The shadow sees an existential threat. The tell is the aftermath. That moment when the heat fades and you're left wondering, why did I react like that? That gap between the stimulus and the response, that's where the shadow lives. The question to ask yourself isn't what happened. It's what inside me just got activated. Sign 2. You judge certain people with an almost visceral intensity, not general dislike. Specific, charged, often disproportionate contempt for a particular type of person or behavior. This is one of Jung's most precise and uncomfortable observations. We tend to most strongly despise in others what we most deny in ourselves. The person who claims to find arrogance unbearable is often suppressing enormous amounts of pride. The one who cannot stand neediness often carries deep, unacknowledged need. The person who rails most loudly against dishonesty is often engaged in a form of self-deception they haven't yet confronted. This is called projection. When we cannot tolerate a trait in ourselves, we project it outward, and then attack it in others with the full force of the self-loathing we refuse to direct inward. This doesn't mean everyone you dislike is a mirror. Some people genuinely behave badly, but when the reaction is charged, when it feels personal, when it stays with you, that charge is information. It is pointing back at you. The people who irritate you most are often your greatest teachers. Sign 3. You consistently sabotage yourself right at the point of success or connection. The relationship is going well, and then you do something to push the person away. The project is almost complete, and then you stop working on it. The opportunity arrives, and you find a reason, a very compelling and rational-sounding reason, not to take it. This is the shadow protecting you, or rather, protecting the belief system buried in the shadow. the belief that you don't deserve to succeed, or that success will require you to become someone you fear becoming, or that visibility will lead to judgment you won't survive. The shadow doesn't experience your goals as good things. It experiences them as threats to its worldview, and it will manufacture obstacles using your own mind to prevent you from reaching them. What makes this sign so difficult to see is that the sabotage almost always feels justified in the moment. There's always a reason. The timing isn't right. The person has this one flaw. I just need a little more time to prepare. These are the shadow's arguments, and they are convincing precisely because the shadow knows exactly which rationalizations will work on you. Line 4. You get possessed by moods you didn't choose and can't explain. Jung used the word possessed deliberately. There are moments when you don't have a mood. The mood has you. A heaviness that descends without obvious cause. An irritability that spreads to everything you touch. A restlessness that makes you unable to be present anywhere. In Jungian psychology, these mood seizures, his phrase, are often the shadow surfacing. Not through a specific trigger, but through accumulated pressure. The material in the shadow has been building. The suppressed emotion needs somewhere to go, and so it rises as a diffuse, unlocatable dark weather inside you. The key distinction: a mood connected to an identifiable cause is not shadow material. Grief about a loss, anxiety about a real threat. These are appropriate responses. What we're talking about is the mood that arrives like weather, uninvited, unnamed, and disproportionate to anything visible on the surface. The worst response to these moods is to suppress them further. The shadow is already making itself known. What it needs is not more suppression, but careful, honest attention. Ask, what am I not letting myself feel or acknowledge right now? Birdie, sign 5. The parts of yourself you hide are the ones that feel most alive. This is the least expected sign, and perhaps the most important. The shadow doesn't only contain what we fear or despise. It also contains what we love but have been told is unacceptable. The ambition you learned to suppress because it made people uncomfortable. The anger that was always punished. The wildness, the softness. The desire to be seen that you've buried under layers of self-sufficiency. Jung called this the positive shadow, the unlived life. The version of yourself that you decided somewhere along the way you couldn't afford to be. You can recognize it by the aliveness. When you allow yourself just for a moment to inhabit that part, something wakes up. Something in you says this is real. The shadow is not only a problem to be solved, it is also a reservoir of unlived potential. Integration doesn't just reduce suffering, it restores the parts of yourself you thought were gone for good. Recognizing these signs is not a diagnosis, it's an invitation. Jung was clear that shadow work is not about destroying the shadow or eliminating the dark material. It is about integration. Bringing what is unconscious into consciousness so that it stops operating without your awareness. The practical starting point is simple. Notice the reactions. When you feel a charge, when something hits harder than it should, when you judge with unusual intensity, when you find yourself sabotaging again, don't immediately explain it away. Sit with it. Get curious about it. Ask what it might be trying to tell you. The shadow, once brought into the light, doesn't disappear, but it changes. The rage becomes honest anger that can be expressed constructively. The self-sabotage becomes recognizable and therefore stoppable. The unlived self becomes available rather than absent. Meeting your shadow is uncomfortable, but living at its mercy, unconsciously, indefinitely, is worse. Jung once wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That is the work. Not brightness, not positivity, consciousness. If you recognized yourself in any of these 5 signs, that recognition is already the beginning of integration. The shadow loses its power the moment it is seen. Next week, how to actually do shadow work. The practical Jung-based process for bringing what's buried into the light. Link is right here. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.